Many of you have requested a video about Hunter S. Thompson, whose most notable feat was being more drugs than man, as well as getting up to some pretty crazy antics, like creating an entire subgenre of journalism and having his ashes shot out of a cannon. However, this video is not about Thompson, because at the end of the day, he really was just an eccentric journalist, but he will be on the channel one day. But for now, I'm going to do you one better. Today's mad lad has partaken in all of the drugs, innovation and wacky hijinks that you could possibly ask of Thompson and more. Journalists may trade in information, but this guy knew too much even for them. So much that he was literally hunted to the ends of the earth by assassins, cartels and even entire governments. Hunter S. Thompson walked so that today's mad lad could run. An iconoclast, a lover of adventure, mystery, and women. John McAfee. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get started, this video has a new sponsor, OmniHeroes. OmniHeroes is a heroic fantasy and strategy RPG for casual play, but provides enough of a challenge to keep you entertained. As an Omni Guardian, it will be up to you to rescue the captive Valkyries from demons and fight together against the evil threatening the world. You will summon forth 100+ legendary heroes, unlock multiple synergies, and match them with hundreds of team compositions at will. In OmniHeroes there are 3 types of synergies, which offer a diverse selection of 17 synergies. You can match over 100 hero team compositions at will, creating diverse synergies that stack powerful battle buffs. Turn adversity to your advantage with a tap of your fingers and conquer enemies with one blow. But the excitement doesn't end there. Dominate the global PvP arena by crafting unbeatable team compositions and engaging in fierce battles against players worldwide. Rise to the top of the global rankings, leaving your mark as a dominant force. So if you are looking for a game that challenges your strategic prowess where every decision matters, OmniHeroes is the perfect fit for you. Since I like a competitive experience with gaming, I really enjoy the PvP battles, but I also really love the artwork of the game. The character design is peak. Also, the game has automated mechanics that can take over when you are tired and wanting a break. Worried about the time-consuming grind to level up? Well, fear not, since OmniHeroes has a unique leveling system that guarantees superb growth with just a tap. Say goodbye to the hassle and enjoy the effortless joy of insane power by simply completing daily quests. With a simple press of a button, accelerate your gains and loot as you demolish countless foes. Enjoy the chilled out gaming experience with OmniHeroes. And if you are worried about the drop rate for legendary heroes, click the link in the description down below to download OmniHeroes and claim 777 free summons through Valkyrie's bestowal right away. Brace yourself for an incredible start, as in the first week you'll secure a minimum of 5 legendary heroes. With over 1 million pre-registrations, everyone is guaranteed to obtain the extraordinary legendary hero Dorabella. What are you waiting for? Seize this opportunity and experience the excitement now. New sponsor, show them some love. Click the link. John David McAfee was born on the 18th of September 1945 in Cinderford, Gloucestershire, to an English mother named Joan Williams, which is literally the only normal thing about him. He was born on a military base where his father, Don McAfee, served with the 596th Ordnance Ammunition Company. And as you can tell from the fact that his dad's name was Don, this made Little John a red-blooded American. However, the Yanks weren't quite able to rob McAfee of his maternal birthright because he felt just as much a subject of God's country as a US citizen. Unfortunately though, McAfee couldn't stay in God's country because his family soon moved to the States when his father returned to civilian life as a road surveyor. But despite growing up in Roanoke, Virginia, life was not almost heaven for the young boy. Just a little disclaimer before we move on with the video, McAfee is obviously a Scottish surname, and the way John pronounces it, McAfee, is wrong. It's an incorrect pronunciation. It's meant to be McAfee, not McAfee, McAfee. So, bear with me throughout the video because the way I pronounce the word is probably going to chop and change because it really bothers me. And because this is absolute mad, lads, McAfee's dad was an abusive alcoholic. As McAfee's ghostwriter, Alex Cody Foster, put it, Don used to beat the shit out of his mum and John was there. He had to watch and he had to listen. All the time, as a child growing up, he had to watch his mum get the shit kicked out of her. And as if all that physical trauma wasn't enough, Don eventually inflicted severe psychological damage on his son by shooting himself in the head when McAfee Jr. was just 15. Or did he? We don't actually know what happened for certain because it's possible that McAfee Sr. didn't actually kill himself. Like father, like son. I mean, if that is the case, then the motive is pretty obvious. You can imagine why someone might have been pushed to the point of killing him after, in McAfee's words, growing up with a father who broke my arms and abused me to the point it was intolerable, abused my mother to the point that I did something about it. What did he mean by this? Well, the official record states that McAfee Sr.'s death was a suicide, and there is no record of McAfee Jr. contradicting that. However, Foster has claimed that McAfee actually admitted to murdering his father and staging it to look like a suicide. Ultimately, all we have is hearsay, so we can't really know what happened for sure. But yeah, McAfee may or may not have murdered his father and staged it to look like a suicide. Either way, this naturally fucked up the young McAfee forever and led to him falling into his most iconic vices because, in his words, he was sorrowful over the death of a father who had never shown me a single kindness. Nevertheless, McAfee didn't let such a traumatic childhood stop him from forging his own path as he came of age. McAfee started small, saying that his first job was mowing lawns or shoveling snow. But he quickly went on to start an impressive career while studying at Roanoke College, as he started his first business. The venture paid for all of the essentials that any student worth his salt needs to get through his studies. Drinking money, which, as a sign of things to come, was a lot. Like, a lot. The product that McAfee sold was magazines. Sort of. The magazines themselves were actually free, but McAfee would charge the customers for the shipping and handling, which, despite all being a ruse, made McAfee a fortune. And according to him, the key was confidence, something that was invaluable for all of his subsequent ventures. After graduating from college, McAfee studied for a PhD in maths at Northeast Louisiana State College, but he was kicked out in 1968 for dating an undergraduate student. But in probably the only honourable turn that he ever did for a woman, he did go on to marry her. He then spent the late 60s working for a company that coded punch card systems, which got McAfee into the computing world. Unfortunately, he ended up getting fired after being arrested for buying weed. Which is weird because that's almost an absolute requirement for the tech business these days. From there, McAfee used a new IBM computer to calibrate the train schedules of the Missouri Pacific Railroad. while tripping balls on LSD. Because that's the man that you want to be in charge of the trains. I mean, it was the 60s. It was the 60s after all, and this is when McAfee started to get really into drugs. On one occasion, he tried DMT, but because podcasts hadn't been invented yet, he didn't feel anything. So he took the whole bag at once, and as he put it, within an hour, my mind was shattered. McAfee then worked as a programmer for the Institute for Space Studies at NASA. And he worked on the Apollo program for a couple of years before spending the 70s on a tour of Silicon Valley, where he worked as a software designer at Univac, an operating system architect at Xerox, and he worked for Omex, all while on a daily diet of cocaine and a bottle of scotch that he would consume at his desk. But while McAfee was steadily working his way up the corporate ladder, the momentum wasn't very sustainable, and he ended up in a very rough spot in 1983. By this point, his wife had left him, he'd become a shut-in, and he began to contemplate suicide. But don't worry, McAfee would never kill himself. So instead, he started going to AA meetings, he sobered up, and turned his life around. For now. In 1986, McAfee was on the wagon and working for Lockheed when he saw Brain in action. Brain was the first computer virus to hit the newfangled IBM PCs. Brain was created by a couple of brothers from Pakistan named Basit Farooq Alvi and Amjad Farooq Alvi. And Brain was designed for a little bit of trolling as a copyright protection measure. You see, on the side of their job running a computer shop, the brothers had made heart monitoring software, and they were getting pissed off that it was being illegally copied and spread around for free by their customers. So they created Brain to track illegal copies and to slow down the pirates' floppy disk drives. And that was it. They went out of their way to make sure that the virus did nothing destructive to computers or delete any data. It just annoyed the victims a little bit and then popped up with a message containing the brothers' names, phone numbers and the address of their shop so that the pirates could contact them to get the virus removed after a small telling off. All the brothers wanted to do was say, "Hey, what's going on, big guy? You just pirated my software." But it somehow ended up spreading and it got a little out of hand because the very first call that they received came from a very angry American, which set the tone for phone tech support to this day. But regardless of intentions, the genie was now out of the bottle and viruses were about to hit the scene in a very big way, which is where McAfee came in. He put his entrepreneur cap on and thought up an idea that hadn't occurred to anyone else yet. A program that could detect and automatically remove viruses. To this end, he created a program called Virus Scan, which did just that, and made McAfee the pioneer that created the world's first antivirus software. In order to sell this software, McAfee founded McAfee Associates in 1987. And for all of you Zoomers out there, the object in that image is called a floppy disk. It was how computer programs and other files were stored and installed in the before 4 times. Now, do not be fooled by the fact that it is neither floppy nor a disk, for this is a relic of great power that allowed your ancestors to play games in the days before Steam power. McAfee was wildly successful, and the software sold like hotcakes. So, the decade ended with the company bringing in $5 million a year. The success didn't just come thanks to McAfee getting into the game first, but also because he was ahead of the curve when it came to getting his software out there, for which he was described as a true pioneer, not just as a security technologist, but as one of the first companies to distribute software over the internet. In 1992, McAfee antivirus was going strong when a virus called Michelangelo emerged, which McAfee very publicly hyped up as one of the worst viruses to date. Finally, a worthy opponent. Michelangelo was reputed to be such a monster of a computer virus that it was expected to hit up to 5 million computers. And there was only one thing that could protect them. Naturally, this caused demand for antivirus software to explode, which made McAfee Associates an absolute fortune and brought them enough success to go public. However, despite all of McAfee's warnings about the sheer threat of Michelangelo, it ultimately only ended up affecting not millions, but just a few 10,000 computers. How very Pfizer of him. After leading McAfee Associates to massive success, McAfee decided to leave the company in 1994, selling off his shares for a very tasty $100 million and spending the rest of the decade working on other tech startups. After getting a second divorce in 2002, McAfee then spent the 2000s living the tech bro lifestyle by getting really into yoga. He started the new millennium and celebrated the world not ending by buying 290 acres in Colorado to build a yoga retreat. And he wrote a bunch of books about yoga as well. But the downward dog wasn't enough, and McAfee wanted to imitate the upward dog as well. So he channeled his inner Howard Hughes by buying 157 acres in New Mexico to found a flight club called Sky Gypsies. The first rule of Flight Club is to make sure all hand luggage is stored in the overhead bagging compartment. Sorry. The idea behind the club was to popularise a sport called aerotrekking, which involved flying planes very low over the desert. But as fun as that sounds, it is extremely fucking dangerous. And not long after starting this initiative, McAfee suffered a huge crash in 2008. Yes, the big financial crash of 2008 cost McAfee so much money that his $100 million fortune tanked to just $4 million. And if you want to know exactly how that happened, just look around because it's happening again right fucking now. Further compounding his financial woes, McAfee was also facing a number of lawsuits, one of which involved someone that died in an aerotrekking accident. So McAfee decided to sell up shop and move to Belize. And you all know what that means. Yes, that's correct. It's Belize time. Antivirus software, yoga retreats. I know you didn't want any of that shit, but we had to talk about it. You are my audience, and I know exactly what you want. It's Belize time. You want to get nuts? Let's get fucking nuts. McAfee moved to Belize. After all, why not? It has plenty of coastline, a government that knows its place, and all of the guns and wives that you can buy. Soon after settling in, he partnered up with a Harvard grad student who was doing research in the area named Alison Adenizio. Together, the pair set up Quorum X, which was dedicated to inventing herbal antibiotics. Adenizio's prior research involved testing a theory that the indigenous plants could disrupt the chemical signalling of bacteria, which is known as quorum sensing, hence the name. Upon hearing about this, McAfee got dollar signs in his eyes and basically gave Adenizio a bunch of money to do that research for him instead in a state-of-the-art lab that he built for her. But when he wasn't busy making cool new drugs, McAfee spent his free time taking drugs. McAfee may have been pretty wild earlier in his career, but his time in Belize saw his hedonism dialed up to a whole other level, involving bath salts, shitloads of alcohol, and rampant degeneracy with his harem in the comfort of his scat hammock, which is exactly what it sounds like. It was a hammock that McAfee would get women to lie in, and it had a hole in it. And McAfee would lie under the hammock with his face directly under the hole, so that when the women relieved themselves, it would fall directly into his mouth. Allegedly. Allegedly. There is a very big allegedly on top of this, because McAfee has denied this just as strongly as he denied literal murder. He would get really upset if anyone ever brought this up, and he insisted that the women who revealed this were paid to lie about him. It's funny that for a man who admitted to so much crazy shit, this is where he draws the line. Though, it is a pretty reasonable line to draw. He also claimed that he never actually did bath salts and talked about them so much as a meme to trick drug users into taking something absolutely fucking insane. Elaborating on this, he said, and I quote, "It was the most tongue-in-cheek thing in the fucking world. If I'm going to do drugs, I'm going to do something that I know is good. I'm going to grab some mushrooms, number one, and maybe get some really fine cocaine. But anybody who knows me knows I would never do drugs." Yeah, neither does Hunter Biden. Plus, I don't see the shame in it. Being told McAfee does drugs is like being told a rock star does drugs. I mean, like, yeah, of course they do. In 2010, McAfee Associates was bought by Intel for $7.7 billion and renamed to Intel Security. His name was scrubbed from the company he founded in a deliberate move to distance itself from him and his increasingly wild reputation, which must have brought out some really strong feelings in McAfee. But, while he had more than enough resources to easily throw a grey matter-esque hissy fit and flex on his former colleagues by cooking meth, there was no need. McAfee was actually thrilled. Because, like everyone else who ever used McAfee software after 1994, McAfee fucking hated it, and he was over the moon to no longer have his name attached to that garbage. He'd never even used it himself in the first place. As he put it himself, "I'm constantly under attack, yet I use no software protection. I protect myself by constantly changing my IP address, by not attaching my name to any device I use, and by not going onto sites where you might pick up a virus." Beyond the PR nightmare that McAfee's existence wrought on the business world, his proclivities almost caught up with him when, in a scene that was later adapted into a couple of pages of a graphic novel about McAfee by Chad Esley, McAfee was in regular, let's just say, contact with a 16-year-old prostitute named Amy Emshwiller. Yes, I know that all of your eyebrows just raised in disgust at the girl's age, but unfortunately it is the start of a little bit of a pattern that I will address in a minute. Also, the age of consent in Belize is 16. But still, you know. Amy's, to put it tactfully, rough childhood and damaged goods vibe was very relatable to McAfee, as he was very much cut from the same cloth. So much so that she ended up at odds with his girlfriend at the time, which caused McAfee to, in his words, can a solid 12-year relationship for a stark raving madwoman. But honestly, I fell in love. And, as with all bozos that fall in love with prostitutes, he soon learned the hard way that her entire shtick was an act. She pulled a gun on him, intending to kill him and steal his cash. But, ultimately, she couldn't do it. At the critical moment, she shut her eyes and ended up shooting the pillow that was next to him. And, like an absolute simp, McAfee fucking forgave her. Instead, he just moved her out of the bungalow that he had built for her on his compound to another place about a mile away. Just because McAfee ended up forgiving Amy doesn't mean that the entire affair left no impression on him. It caused him to look up and realise just how much of an impoverished shithole his new home really was, and just how deeply corrupt it was. From Amy, he'd learned about all of the systemic problems, drug traffickers, and gang wars that Belize was facing. So, he decided to do something about it. All of McAfee's antics up to this point occurred in the comfort of his compound, which was essentially a fortress protected by private security. And by private security, I mean a gang that he had hired. But then McAfee started to take it a step further. The place looked like the Wild West. So, he was going to act like it. McAfee basically took over the village of Carmelita, building a jail and even setting up a curfew so that he could really get into the power fantasy that was a weird mix of John Wayne and Heart of Darkness, and also out of fear of the local gangsters. One of these rival gangsters even publicly threatened McAfee, and he was later found tortured and beaten to death. And it was never really discovered what actually happened or who done it. At one point, McAfee dialed the lawman persona up to 11 when a local fired a gun outside of Amy's house. With her in tow, McAfee rocked up to the local's shack and Smith & Wesson in hand. He told the guy's family that he would kill him if he didn't turn in his gun. All this sounds bonkers, but so far it has been pretty funny. However, there was also a dark side to the carnage that McAfee revelled in. He had made a lot of enemies during his time in Belize, and he became increasingly paranoid that any one of them was out to get him, which led to him adding more and more guns and goons to his roster. All of this insanity got in the way of his antibiotics venture, and it spooked Adenizio into deciding to leave, who is quoted as saying, "He tried to convince me that love doesn't exist, so I might as well just give in and sleep with all these crazy circus folk. I was naive about who and what Mr. McAfee really is." Despite McAfee seeing so much degeneracy in the village of Carmelita that he basically declared war on it, Adenizio lived nearby and had no problems with it until McAfee, and I quote, "turned into a very scary person." However, leaving didn't seem to be so simple. Adenizio alleged that when she tried to tell McAfee that she was quitting, he got angry and then drugged and raped her. And she then said that friends of hers helped her to escape after she locked herself in the lab to keep McAfee away from her. Obviously, McAfee denied the allegations, and he straight up accused her of lying, complaining that, and I quote, "Alison is an unhappy person who is unhappy to the core. Whatever's on the table, she will turn it this way, that way, and make something out of it to be the cause of her unhappiness." Soon after Adenizio's departure, the entire venture gradually fell apart as investors backed out. I know it's fucking dark and it really messes with the tone of the video, but I don't know if I believe her, maybe I do, maybe I don't, I have absolutely no idea, though there is a little bit more ground to cover before I explain why. As a result of McAfee ratcheting up his security in a paranoid frenzy, the authorities got suspicious, and they decided that the only reason why someone would have such souped up defences is that they have something to hide. So, on the 30th of April 2012, McAfee's compound was raided by Belize's gang suppression unit on the suspicion of possessing unregistered firearms and cooking meth. During the raid, McAfee was arrested, his passport and weapons were confiscated, and for good measure, the cops also shot his dog. Because cops. As the cops who were cuffing McAfee declared that he was under arrest on suspicion of producing meth, McAfee, cool as a cucumber, turned to them and said, "That's a startling hypothesis, sir, because I haven't sold drugs since 1983. Ultimately, the raid ended in a very shocking twist, something that none of you will have seen coming. All of the weapons were licensed, and the cops did not find any illegal drugs. There was no meth. The cops thought that the lab being used for antibiotics research was a meth lab. So, McAfee was released without charge the following morning. However, that doesn't mean that McAfee hadn't done anything wrong. During the raid, the cops found a 17-year-old girl, which means that with the pattern of sex crimes, both alleged and actual, established, it's time to address the elephant in the room. Sure, McAfee got up to a lot of wild stuff that, while I can't condone it, is very entertaining, and it only adds to the guy's mystique and appeal. However, This is not one of those things. In fact, knowing that McAfee usually had at least one 16, 17-year-old girl in tow for a lot of his adventures during this period when he was in his 60s... Look, it's fucked up. It is just fucked up. I'm sorry. It's fucked up, and it makes it really hard to root for him, which is really saying something when his biggest rival is the government. It's a huge black mark against a man that I obviously have a lot of respect for. But McAfee was a man of extremes and ambiguous to outright dubious morals. I think it's very important to recognise that, as based as he wasn't a good guy. He wasn't a bad guy either, since what he was doing was legal in Belize, but just because something is legal does not mean it is moral. So, he wasn't a bad guy, but he wasn't a good guy. And I've included all of this in the video since I want to give you a complete picture of who and what McAfee was, because if I don't, I'm doing you a disservice by essentially lying by omission. But yeah, it is very, very unfortunate that John McAfee was the kind of libertarian that makes it very difficult to be a libertarian. However, McAfee's next round of legal troubles unfortunately did not come from his carousing with underagers, but were instead caused by a disagreement that he had with his fellow American expat and neighbour, Gregory Fall. Fall was not a big fan of McAfee and especially didn't like the loud barking of McAfee's dogs. So he complained about them to the police, claiming that they were vicious and attacked people. Fall also complained that McAfee's security guards walked around with guns at night and there were too many vehicles coming and going from the property. Now, we've all had that neighbour, and while they are annoying to deal with, they're usually easy enough to ignore. However, this situation soon escalated when 4 of McAfee's dogs were killed, 2 of which were reportedly fed a poisoned tortilla. It was believed that Fall had carried out this most heinous of misdeeds, and later on, McAfee was allegedly heard swearing deadly revenge. And you all know how it goes whenever dogs are murdered for petty reasons. The very next day, on the 11th of November 2012, Fall was found by his housekeeper with a 9mm Luger round in his head, and McAfee was immediately named as a person of interest. To this day, no one really knows if McAfee actually did it or not because, unlike with his dad, McAfee never slipped up when recounting the events around Fall's death, and he has always emphatically denied having anything to do with it. However, many still believe that McAfee either pulled the trigger himself or he hired a hitman to do it for him. Of course, whenever a murder happens, investigations start. So the authorities obviously wanted to ask McAfee a few questions. But McAfee saw the cops coming and he panicked when he heard that they just wanted to talk. That's an old cop trick, by the way. Whenever police say they just want to talk, they don't, you're under arrest. So McAfee decided to hide from them by burying himself in the sand and putting a cardboard box over his head. And despite the fact that you would think that hiding from the cops by playing Metal Gear Solid Shit Eater sounds like a very easy way to get absolutely humiliated, it actually worked. Yeah, McAfee ended up lying there for hours until the cops left, but it worked. McAfee fervently denied the murder allegations, and despite having lived rent-free in Fall's head, McAfee maintained that, and I quote, "The entire 5 years I was there, I'd said maybe 15 words to him." He even said on the official podcast that he didn't believe that Fall poisoned his dogs because Fall had dogs himself, and he clearly loved them. While Fall may have been an annoyance, McAfee never wavered in his assertion that he neither killed him nor would he have really cared enough about Fall to do so. Nevertheless, even if you don't like someone, their senseless murder is still a tragedy, and McAfee released an open letter to offer his sympathies to Fall's family, denounced the corruption in Belize that he claimed got Fall killed, and he offered a $25,000 reward for whoever could capture the killer. Despite being emphatic about his innocence, McAfee's side of the story largely fell on deaf ears, and he became increasingly convinced that the murder was actually a play by the Belizean authorities to bring him down for speaking out against corruption and for refusing to give the government money, saying, and I quote, "Since April of last year, the Belizean government has been trying to level charge after charge against me, all of them groundless, none of them sticking. This is simply the latest in that chain." So, with seemingly no way out and certain that he would be silenced if he was to be arrested, McAfee refused to be the fall guy and fled. He went on the run in the jungle with his girlfriend Samantha Venegas, who was still way too young for him, but at least she was actually 18. And he was also with two Vice reporters, Rocco Castoro and Robert King, who were filming a documentary about McAfee that eventually became Running with the Devil, which is very, very good, and it's on Netflix and you should go watch it. While the documentary wouldn't come out until years later, McAfee's flight from his compound was reported on at the time by Taiwanese media in a really, really bizarre fashion. They created a 3D animated reconstruction in which McAfee walks past a big gun wall to open a big drawer containing scantily clad women, and he picks one to take on the run with him. Helping him on the run was a network of spies and informants that McAfee kept on retainer to keep him one step ahead of his pursuers and to tip him off if his location was compromised and shit was about to hit the fan. McAfee also used a body double to cover his tracks, who was strategically arrested in Mexico after getting up to some hijinks while carrying a North Korean passport. However, the plan didn't actually work because the authorities in Mexico didn't care enough to keep the double in custody. So they just kicked him out and didn't bother to draw attention to the fact that they supposedly had John McAfee in custody. But while the ruse didn't work, the double was still handsomely rewarded. In addition to all of the cloak and dagger chicanery, McAfee also took amusingly simple measures to stay one step ahead of his pursuers, such as disguising himself by dyeing his hair black and making sure to be on the move as much as possible. But even if you've ruffled the feathers of some authorities that you believe to be corrupt, McAfee's escape plan goes way beyond simply being careful. McAfee earnestly believed that he was being tracked by a paramilitary hit squad and he expected to be executed if he was caught. So the stakes were massive. But why? Well, while he was sure that the authorities were after him, part of why McAfee went into hiding with such urgency is that he was worried that Fall might have been caught in the crossfire with one of McAfee's other enemies, having said, "I thought maybe they were coming for me, they mistook him for me, they got the wrong house, he's dead, they killed him, it spooked me out." But which enemies would go to all of the trouble of sending a hit squad after McAfee? Well, according to McAfee, all of them. His main beef was with the Belizean government, as he was very vocal about his distaste for it and insisted that it was deeply corrupt. Well, I mean, it was a government. But he believed that anyone or a combination of the cops, the government, rival gangs and cartels were all after him out of retribution for all of the ways that he'd fucked with them since the moment he arrived in Belize. In fact, he also believed that the Belizean government killed Fall themselves as an excuse to bring McAfee in and to deal with him for possessing sensitive information about the corruption of the Belizean government. And he was pretty adamant about the lack of due process, saying, and I quote, "Things do not operate out here as they do in the States. We are living in a near dictatorship where the legal system is subservient to the cabinet." However, the authorities didn't exactly agree with this assessment of the situation. Surprising, I know. The Belizean Prime Minister, Dean Barrow, said, "I don't want to be unkind to the gentleman, but I believe he is extremely paranoid, even bonkers." But looking over his shoulder wasn't the only thing that McAfee was up to while on the run. He also passed the time much like he did in his compound, enjoying a steady supply of unholy amounts of whiskey and drugs. And also playing Russian roulette. Now, for a man that clearly put a lot of stock in his continued survival, I mean, he's literally on the run because he's worried people are going to kill him. Playing Russian roulette sounds kind of stupid. I mean, it seems counterproductive to what you're doing. You know, after all, you can die doing that. Do you know that? Yeah, do you know that in Russian roulette you can fucking die? But don't worry, John McAfee knew what he was doing. He would never kill himself. After a good jaunt in the Belizean jungle, McAfee fled to Guatemala, where he hung out with the vice journalists who were still with him, and they posted a picture online with the caption, "We are with John McAfee right now, suckers," and they forgot to delete the metadata from the picture. So they had accidentally doxed John McAfee's exact location. Because journalists, McAfee was relaxing in a hotel one second and the next, his exact location and satellite images of the very pool he was about to jump into were suddenly all over the internet, prompting him and his crew to haul arse the fuck out of there as quickly as possible. McAfee and his entourage kept on the move for 2 days until his month on the run finally ended with him being arrested for illegally entering Guatemala. Naturally, he applied for political asylum to protect himself from 2 9mm rounds of political persecution to the head, saying, and I quote, "This is not about a murder in Belize. This began on the 30th of April last year when 42 armed soldiers stormed my property." But McAfee's boat unfortunately hadn't come from France, so despite his plea for help, the Guatemalan government denied John McAfee political asylum. This was very bad news for McAfee, because he could not stress enough that he was absolutely certain that he was going to die if he returned to Belize, which was exactly what the Guatemalans had planned for him. But it appeared that McAfee had a more immediate threat to his life than being deported, because while awaiting his fate, McAfee was called back in for questioning when he suddenly collapsed. After receiving urgent medical attention, it turned out that McAfee had suffered 2 heart attacks. It's not really hard to imagine why. The man was in his 60s and hadn't exactly lived the healthiest lifestyle, and he was in a very stressful situation. So it makes perfect sense that this predicament meant that the authorities were forced to keep him in the hospital for a while to recover. But, as luck would have it, this really bad situation had a silver lining. McAfee's hospital stay delayed his deportation, and by some insanely fortunate coincidence, this delay bought McAfee's lawyer just enough time to file appeals with the authorities, and the appeals were successful. So, instead of being extradited to Belize and his certain doom, McAfee was deported back home to the United States. What amazing luck! Who would have thought that heart attacks could turn out to be a good thing? The timing was absolutely perfect. A little bit too perfect, wasn't it? Yeah. McAfee has been pretty open about what really happened once he was safely back home. He faked, I mean, you knew he did, but he faked the heart attacks. He did it to take advantage of his captor's duty of care, simply stating, and I quote, "Sure I faked it. What would you have done?" I mean, I can hardly call this play clever because the Hawthorne Gambit is one of the oldest tricks in the book, but hey, you can't go wrong with the classics. Soon after landing in Miami, McAfee dumped Samantha and started writing about his adventure in a blog. When he was asked about what his plans were after escaping Belize by the skin of his teeth, he said, and I quote, "I simply would like to live comfortably day by day, fish, swim, enjoy my declining years." It would very quickly become apparent that that was a fucking lie. In 2013, McAfee took on the services of a Florida hooker named Janice Dyson, and then he married her. a relationship that he would stick to for the rest of his life. But it seems like McAfee didn't learn from the last time that he fell for a prostitute, because he found himself in hijinks once again when their relationship was getting started. While living in Tennessee, the couple found themselves in a very weird situation where Janice's former pimp would force her to help him with a kidnapping plot by leaving doors unlocked and drugging McAfee's food. And Janice would do what she could to steer McAfee away from the kidnapping attempt until she couldn't hold it in anymore and told him everything. While all of this was going on, McAfee was extremely paranoid and he believed that the cartels were still after him. So he made his house a veritable fortress. Cameras were everywhere, booby traps were laid, his bedroom door was barred, the crawl space was boarded up, and he was even shooting the walls. And despite all of that, McAfee insisted that he wasn't actually paranoid because, and I quote, "Are you paranoid if they're really after you? I don't know. They are really after me. I do not believe I'm paranoid, but the press thinks so. I do not believe I'm paranoid. Absolutely not." But McAfee's paranoia from his time in Belize was vindicated in his mind when his old compound burned down in an event that McAfee described as not just a strange coincidence. But McAfee didn't need that old place anymore. Obviously, he was never going to return to Belize, but he'd sort of outgrown it as well. McAfee's antics, both at home and abroad, led to him developing quite a cult of personality, which he actively fed by fully committing to the bit as the tattooed and heavily armed madman that was hardened by life in the jungle and had fucked so much that he claimed to have 47 bastards to his name. Or not to his name, since that's kind of how bastards work. But while McAfee was at the height of his power, the software that bore his name had long since gone to complete shit, which inspired one of the greatest shitposts of all time. If you haven't seen How to Uninstall McAfee Antivirus, just go and watch it right now and then come back, because it's absolutely fucking glorious. It opens with him throwing a laptop over his shoulder and burning a banknote to light a cigarette, and then it immediately goes off the rails, poking fun at not only how dogshit McAfee Antivirus is, but also the public's perception of himself, with his debauchery, carousing with hookers and strippers, drug use, love of guns, and paranoia all dialed up to 11 until the sketch ends with McAfee being credited as having played both of his alter egos. By this point, Intel had bought McAfee Associates for $7.6 billion, and it had been renamed in the merger. However, this change didn't stick, and the company was eventually unrenamed. So McAfee once again had his name on the company that he had built. Much to his chagrin. McAfee really wasn't happy about having his name attached to this piece of shit software, even though he was the one that built it. McAfee later had a bit of a legal scuffle with Intel over the commercial use of his name, which settled with McAfee being able to use his name to promote his stuff in any marketing materials, but he couldn't name any companies after himself. But he seemed fine with that, saying, and I quote, "That certainly beats having to live with the entrepreneur formerly known as McAfee." But it wasn't just McAfee's own name that he was buying and selling, but also his life story. In early 2013, Warner Brothers actually bought the film rights to a Wired article titled John McAfee's Last Stand. McAfee was actually pretty interested in the film's development, and he railed against the casting of Johnny Depp in the titular role because he wanted to be played by Morgan Freeman. I mean, at least it's not Netflix doing it. After selling his story to the second most crooked and evil institution in the country, McAfee decided to try and join the first most crooked and evil institution in the country. In early 2015, he threw his hat in the ring for the upcoming election. John McAfee was running for president. McAfee initially did so on behalf of a party that he founded called the Cyber Party, with the slogan, "Here's to the crazy ones." He seemed confident that he would do well because, as he put it, "I have a huge underground following on the web. I promise you I will win because I have the votes." However, small parties like these never actually have any real chance of winning, so McAfee later decided to throw his lot in with a different party that also had no chance of winning, the Libertarian Party.
Should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car?
Hell no.
What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your own damn toaster?
The license to drive? You know, I'd like to see some competency exhibited by people before they drive.
As you can see, there was clearly some tight competition in those primaries. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not throwing shade. I love all of you very, very much. I love the Mises Caucus. I'm even in the Scottish Libertarian Party myself. And even though we are all correct about literally everything, we don't do well in elections. I'm sorry. One day, guys. Come on. One day. The main tenet of McAfee's run was the fact that he would be pretty much the only person in the entire US government that actually understood how technology works, the sort of effects that it would have on national security and society at large, and how to actually protect the United States from cyber attacks. As he put it, "It's clear that the leadership of our country is illiterate on the fundamental technology that supports everything in life for us now. That is cyber science, our smartphones, our military hardware, our communications." And if you look at all of the internet-based bills that keep going through parliaments everywhere, such as the online safety bill in Britain, nothing has changed since then. Also, as someone who has literally been in the European Court to debate against Article 13, I can confirm for absolute certain that our lawmakers not only have zero understanding of how the internet or any technology actually fucking works, but they also do not even read the legislation that they are voting in. But while politicians are so tech illiterate that the bills are obscenely draconian, they are also so tech illiterate that the laws become completely unenforceable as long as you have a VPN. Look, it's not great having corrupt elites, but at least we've got corrupt elites that have no idea what the fuck they're doing. But aside from actually understanding how technology and the internet actually affect our lives, what else qualified McAfee for the Oval Office? What policies would McAfee implement as president? What was his platform? Well, look at him. Take a fucking guess. McAfee ultimately came second in the 2016 primaries because apparently the Libertarian Party hates winning. I'm sorry, guys, but despite losing, it seemed for a moment that he might still get a seat in the White House. When he wasn't playing politics or going on capers, McAfee continued to be influential in the cybersecurity sphere, to the point where Anonymous allegedly wanted him to lead them in making the internet safe from hackers as their cybersecurity czar within the newly established Trump administration, to the point of staging a protest outside of Trump Tower. Naturally, McAfee didn't actually want anything to do with this, saying, and I quote, "I believe that the US government is filled with deadwood, ossified practices and procedures, does not reward innovation and creativity, and is in fact completely dysfunctional. It needs a 35-year-old hacker with balls of brass and nothing to lose." Despite McAfee's apparent lack of interest, it seems like this protest might have been McAfee's way of developing relevant skills for his next run for the Oval Office, because it's possible that this protest might have been McAfee's first psyop. Soon afterwards, accusations that this protest was staged by McAfee himself to stroke his ego started floating around, with an anonymous-themed Twitter account claiming that there weren't any actual anonymous groups behind this protest. McAfee himself denied the allegations because why the fuck would he waste money staging a protest to get a job that he doesn't even want? After not having passed the world's biggest job interview, McAfee continued to work in cybersecurity. And he also got really into crypto, which he liked to talk about a lot on Twitter. In fact, McAfee liked the promise of crypto so much and was so confident about the prospects for its value that he announced that he would eat his dick on live. He would eat his dick on live TV if Bitcoin didn't hit $1 million by the end of 2020. For anyone else that's into crypto, you will know that Bitcoin it's not even close to that. And it's not the most ideal promise to make because eating dicks never really works out in the way one hopes. It feels a lot more like sucking dick than getting your dick sucked. So I've read. But anyway, McAfee has eaten a lot worse already. Allegedly. In January of 2019, it seemed like McAfee had gotten a bit too into crypto because he found himself in a lot more trouble than ever before, and for a lot worse than refusing to eat his dick over Bitcoin. The US government was trying to slap him down with tax evasion charges to the tune of $4 million, which McAfee fervently denied despite the taxman having insisted that he had made millions from consulting work, speaking engagements, crypto, and selling the movie rights to his story, which he allegedly dodged paying by having everything put into bank and crypto accounts in other people's names. McAfee also responded to the situation by saying, "I have not filed a tax return for 8 years. Why? 1. Taxation is illegal. 2. I paid tens of millions already and received jack shit in services. 3. I'm done making money. I live off of cash from McAfee Incorporated. My net income is negative. But I'm a prime target for the IRS. Here I am." All of that was absolutely based. And he also responded to the charges by fleeing the country. Now, before you get on the McAfee did nothing wrong hype train because of how much we all hate taxes, and rightly so, there was some genuinely dodgy shit on his rap sheet as well. He was accused of crypto fraud. Allegedly, what McAfee would do was buy a bag of whatever coin caught his attention at the time and then promote it heavily on Twitter for a quick pump and dump Logan Paul style. But even though McAfee was adamant that he earnestly believed in all of the coins he promoted, the authorities were onto him because he promoted them without disclosing that he was paid $23 million to do so. And as if that wasn't enough, McAfee's monetary legal woes did not stop there because a Florida court had ordered McAfee to pay $25 million to Gregory Falls estate in a wrongful death claim, though McAfee naturally refused to pay it. So, between that, the crypto chicanery and the tax evasion charges, McAfee was facing up to 30 years in prison if they got him. So, you can see why he fled. McAfee's British side came out as he hit the high seas and went sailing across the world to avoid the authorities, living on a super yacht with Janice, 4 dogs, a couple of security guards, and about 4 metric shitloads of guns. However, as cool as it would be, you can't sustain yourself at sea without returning to the land every so often to resupply. But unfortunately, Tortuga had closed for business quite some time ago, so McAfee had to settle for more civilised ports. As you would expect, this isn't exactly a safe practice when you're a fugitive, so the odd capture did occur. On one occasion, McAfee was detained in the Dominican Republic under suspicion of carrying high-caliber weapons, ammo, and military-style gear. And he was, but luckily McAfee wasn't locked up for very long. His stuff was simply confiscated and he was soon back on his way. Now, you may think that this was a dicey close call, but McAfee didn't seem particularly bothered by the whole affair. In fact, he looked like he was in complete control of the situation the entire time. I mean, Look at him. No one should look that happy when facing time in a foreign jail. Yet he was perfectly comfy, unbothered, moisturised, happy, in his lane, focused, flourishing, heavily armed, high as fuck. But that was just because being arrested was part of the routine. And it actually happened quite a few times. Whenever McAfee got himself arrested somewhere, he would mobilise his army of lawyers to get him out and back into international waters as quickly as possible. And if he needed a little more time for his legal team to work its magic, he would employ the tried and true, "oh no everyone, I'm having a heart attack" technique. He also got a number of body doubles to run interference as required. Being a body double for McAfee sounds like a pretty sweet gig, doesn't it? I mean, if you're going to pretend to be someone by replicating their lifestyle, you might as well pick the seafaring party animal that's armed to the teeth and have a bit of fun with it. I mean, because as far as jobs for body doubles go, there's a lot worse out there. And on top of the perks of getting everything needed to keep up the act, McAfee's doubles were also handsomely rewarded if they managed to commit to the bit, because in return for their services, they were given access to pretty much whatever form of payment they wanted, such as money, women, adventure, drugs, information, contacts, housing, McAfee's wife, allegedly. However, with the high reward comes high risk, because doubling for someone that half the world is hunting is actually pretty fucking dangerous, and it could have fatal repercussions. After all, acting as a decoy for someone like John McAfee is going to put a pretty big target on your back. And not all of the body doubles got out of his enemy's crosshairs unscathed. The most notable incident at this point in the story was one double actually being poisoned in mid-2019, for which McAfee placed the blame squarely on the US government. A month later, he tweeted a picture of himself and Janice holding guns, saying, "The CIA have attempted to collect us. We are at sea now and will report more soon. I will continue to be dark for the next few days." But why would the CIA want McAfee? Hell, why would the Yanks go to such trouble to bring McAfee in when his beef was ostensibly just with the IRS? Well, for one, the IRS is probably the most petty and overzealous of the three-letter agencies, and they would absolutely chase a man across the ocean just to rob him, even if it was for a $600 Venmo transaction. But McAfee reckoned that the CIA had jumped on the bandwagon because he claimed to have collected reams of files on government corruption, and they wanted to sink him for it. So, essentially, according to McAfee, the tax evasion and crypto charges were simply the American government's attempt to Al Capone him. So, with that in mind, you can imagine how McAfee got exponentially more paranoid in the wake of Epstein's death the following August. So much so that he actually got a disclaimer tattooed on his arm, declaring that he would never kill himself and that if it appeared that he ever did, it was because he was whacked. In the business, we call this foreshadowing. We don't know what the subtle messages that McAfee referenced in the tweet were, but considering how many enemies McAfee had by this point, and well, everything we know about the CIA, I don't really have any reason to doubt him. But it's McAfee we're talking about, so it probably should be taken with a pinch of salt, like everything else that comes out of his mouth. I don't deny for a second that they were absolutely after him, I just don't think it was to the extent that he thought. Naturally, the stakes of McAfee's travels escalating to cloak and dagger proportions sent the collective imagination of the public into overdrive, and only further added to his sheer mystique as everyone everywhere started asking, "John McAfee, what does he know? Does he know things? Let's find out." McAfee managed to maintain that attention by frequently appearing on podcasts and doing remote interviews from out at sea, where he spread his wisdom far and wide. But his main outlet for his musings was still Twitter, where to the shock and absolute bemusement of everyone, he explained the precise ins and outs of the absolute whale of a time that he was having out at sea. I'm very sorry. I have to talk about it. I'm sorry, guys. John McAfee talked extensively about fucking whales. And I don't mean that he'd run out of attractive hookers and had to resort to banging fatties. I mean literal whales. You know, the like those big fuckers in the ocean, bringing an entirely new meaning to humpback and sperm whale. And if you're asking, how the fuck does a human man fuck a whale? Well, it was a sick whale, allegedly. But that is bestiality, I hear you cry. How could anyone abuse an animal like that? It's inhumane. Well, don't forget that whales are highly intelligent. Am I really about to do this bit? Okay. Don't forget that whales are highly intelligent creatures, and they are surely smart enough to know what they want. And as McAfee pointed out, they're so big and powerful that if they didn't want to be fucked, anyone that tried would die fucking instantly. And not only did he insist that whale fucking was consensual, but he was also very respectful about it. You know, he phoned them back afterwards and all that. Even going as far as to call someone out for not being respectful enough or observing the proper procedure for fucking a whale. And yes, according to McAfee, there is a correct way to fuck a whale. You wait until it's resting on the surface and swim under it, stick the harpoon in, and there she blows. And apparently, it just works. That said, though, it's weird that McAfee was so anti-authoritarian, yet here he was telling everyone to get in the pod. I'm sorry. McAfee talked about it so much that word spread far and wide and it became a bit of a meme. And of course, loads of people fell for it, hook, line and sinker. However, there's a twist. As McAfee later explained on the official podcast, it was all a big troll. A ruse, a ploy, a bamboozle, if you will.
No, please, God, it was a joke. I said it was a joke, and it was more than a joke. It was a social fucking experiment. Because, let's get real, people. I was talking about humpback whales, 70,000 pounds, 50 feet long. They can destroy a medium-sized ship just with a simple swipe of their dive to half a mile. Now, if you think some puny human is going to, first of all, swim alongside at 8 knots, which is impossible for humans, dive down 20 feet while swimming alongside at 8 knots, and manage to survive even touching a fucking whale in a private place. Well, then you need to stop smoking rainbows and move out of your mother's basement.
And if you're wondering what the social experiment was behind telling the world that he literally fucks whales and getting half of the world to believe him, well, he soon explained, and it makes a surprising amount of sense.
Here's the point, people. Here's the point. I don't just fuck with people to fuck with people. I fuck with people to learn things. And if some old man, not even, I don't know why it's the young people who really follow me, okay, and tag along, but I do. Okay. If I can convince half of the people of such an unbelievable thing, then what do you think our government is capable of with all of its resources?
Say what you will about the delivery, but the message makes sense. People at large are very easily manipulated. Just look at how fast the conveyor belt of current things turns and how quickly the masses eagerly switch their outrage programming whenever it's convenient for the media. By the way, McAfee was so paranoid that he straight up told the official podcast guys that they would be monitored and followed by his goons for the next 5 years. Just 15 months to go, boys. But seriously, go and check out the full podcast. It's a very good show. And I can't believe that I have to say this, but don't fuck whales. Don't even think about fucking whales. Don't even think about fucking anything that isn't a consenting human adult. You fucking freaks. Take the collar off and go get a job. In addition to appearing on other people's shows, McAfee also spread his own message on his own platform, as I mentioned earlier. He often posted videos of himself singing at a keyboard, and he also posted one video where he very generously gave both sides advice for the upcoming US Civil War.
Now then, for the red states, the conservatives, the gun owners, you should anticipate that the West Coast is going to arm itself to the fucking teeth with the latest Israeli weapons. I suggest you preempt this by selling them your Daisy BB rifles and tell them they're AR-15s. They won't know the fucking difference. Colorado and New Mexico, worthless land. Ignore it. See if you can sell it to Mexico.
And yes, that is tinfoil on the walls. McAfee actually had a Faraday cage on his boat. While McAfee clearly had a lot on his plate at this point, he somehow still managed to find the time to run for president in the 2020 election, despite having been formally indicted with tax evasion and willful failure to file tax returns for his income from speaking engagements, consulting work, and crypto projects. He still managed to launch his campaign in exile. When asked why he was running, McAfee explained, "My campaign platform contains one item. How do we free ourselves from a government that no longer serves us, but instead has become our master, controlling our every action down to the detail of what we may or may not put into our bodies and minds? Our two-party system created a voting process which is an illusion, and a government that fluctuates between two extremes, each extreme annulling any progress made by the opposition in the prior administration. It is a government that has gone insane. While we carry the burden of this government, we are not free. So do not ask me about immigration, foreign relations, education, etc. I have no idea. Those claiming that they do are lying to themselves, or if not, they are purposely lying to you. We must first be free. Freedom for the people is my only goal." Now, that sounds compelling, especially since McAfee seemed to understand that democracy is a failed system that should really be disposed of. But I'm not so convinced by his presidential run this time around. As much as I love a good meme candidate, I just couldn't support McAfee 2020 because he clearly wasn't a man that kept his promises. Only 5 days into the election year, he backed out of one of his earliest pledges by announcing that he wasn't going to eat his dick. For a man who always commits wholeheartedly to the bit, I can understand if you feel betrayed by this sudden U-turn from the world's first honest politician. I mean, they're all drug-addled degenerates, but at least McAfee was honest about it. The dick eating was not the only wild McAfee story that turned out to be untrue, however. In August of 2020, the papers went wild when McAfee tweeted that he had been arrested in Norway for wearing a lace thong over his face and refusing to replace it with a more medically compliant mask. Now, as funny as that is, and McAfee himself was highly amused by how much traction the story got, it's not true. Well, the thong mask was real. He actually did do that because ha ha ha, funny meme, but the story of being arrested in Norway over it was just a hoax that McAfee had concocted for a bit of fun. Once again, McAfee had thoroughly trolled the media because even though the pictures of his arrest clearly showed that he was being arrested by German cops, the whole world reported that he was arrested over a joke mask in Norway. Just because McAfee said so. The media just couldn't help but take the bait. Despite the fact that all of McAfee's adventures occurred after he hit the retirement age and yet he appeared to have more vigour than ever, he couldn't run forever. The man had partied hard, but it's a sad fact of life that your parents will eventually come home early and beat the shit out of you for trashing the house. Sorry, Dad. On the 3rd of October 2020, McAfee was arrested for the last time while boarding a flight from Spain to the city formerly known as Constantinople, while using a British passport. The next day, the Yanks smelled blood in the water and the SEC charged McAfee for the alleged crypto pump and dump. And they also accused him of concealing assets in others' names. And then the extradition process started. Much like in Guatemala, McAfee fully intended to fight the extradition attempt because he believed that he faced political persecution back where they were sending him, saying during a hearing that he was hoping the Spanish court will see the injustice of this. The United States wants to use me as an example. But on a less tinfoil hatty level, McAfee also wanted to fight simply because he was getting on in years and he knew that because of his age, he would inevitably die in prison if he ended up convicted in the United States. And that's not a particularly good way for anyone to go, never mind someone so much larger than life. He deserved to sail off into the sunset on one last adventure and never be seen again, like Sir Francis Drake. Instead, he spent the next 8 months in a Spanish jail while the extradition battle raged on in the background of his continued shitposting. That's right, McAfee may have been incarcerated, but he still managed to remain active on Twitter. He gave many updates on how his prison stay was going, including describing it as a fascinating adventure. And he repeatedly stated how he was fine and absolutely not planning on killing himself. Although he did express a bit of concern about a fellow inmate who had no memory at all of cutting his own father's throat. But it's fine. I'm sure that no harm whatsoever will come to John McAfee while he's in prison. The tweets weren't quite on the level of Andrew Tate's prison arc because unfortunately McAfee wasn't battling ghosts every night, but his mind still seemed to go to somewhat similar places sometimes and got surprisingly introspective every so often. I don't have enough time to show you all of McAfee's updates from this period, but his Twitter account is still being maintained for posterity and I thoroughly Oh, this is a long video. And I thoroughly recommend that you go for a scroll through it yourselves. His tweets were certainly something. You've also got to love the avatar as well. McAfee seemed to be a pretty big JoJo fan. In addition to prison musings, McAfee also threatened the triggering of a dead man switch of over 31 terabytes of documents containing proof of serious corruption in multiple governments in case anything ever happened to him while he was on the inside. But unfortunately, this threat didn't seem to pay off because on the 23rd of June 2021, the Spanish National Court finally authorised McAfee's extradition, sealing his fate. But it appeared that despite being completely fucked, he found a way to at least take that fate into his own hands because a few hours later, the 75-year-old John McAfee was found hanging in his cell. Upon hearing the sad news, the internet fell into mourning with resounding cries of, "Are you fucking serious?" Now, I must admit that at first I thought that he really did kill himself because of the situation that he was in. I thought that despite having a few more chances to appeal, he must have seen the writing on the wall and decided to make tragic use of the last shred of freedom that he had left. However, that was over 2 years ago, and the government are dodgy bastards. So, what has changed since then that changed my mind and got me donning the tinfoil hat? Nothing. Nothing has changed. Since the initial announcement of McAfee's suicide, nothing has changed. There have been no updates or anything. In 2 years, no information whatsoever, and that is sus as fuck. McAfee's remains haven't been released to his own wife so that she can give him a proper burial, which is instantly really fucking suspicious. At least Epstein's autopsy report was published, even though the coroner's report and literal photographs showed that someone had clearly strangled him. So I dread to think about what they did to McAfee that needed to be kept under wraps. So to me, it's pretty fucking clear that McAfee didn't uninstall himself. But hey, at least he went out swinging. But McAfee was a man of means, a very mischievous spirit, and almost literal copies of himself were out there as body doubles. So lots of people still believe that the Spanish actually got a body double and the real McAfee is still alive, whether it be in witness protection or by any other means. One of the McAfee truthers is actually his ex from his time in Belize, Samantha Venegas, who believes that McAfee is not only still alive, but still loves her. As Sam claimed, and I quote, 2 weeks ago, after his death, I got a call from Texas. It's me, John. I paid off people to pretend that I am dead. But I'm not dead. There are only 3 persons in this world that knows that I'm still alive. And then he asked me to run away with him. McAfee's ghostwriter, Alex Cody Foster, dismissed Sam's claims outright, but reportedly, he also had his own weird experience involving a Telegram notification saying that McAfee's number had signed into it. Foster then sent a message saying, "Hey, you're using a dead man's phone, who are you?" He was left on read, and the number was wiped soon afterwards. So, Foster was never sure if Janice, McAfee himself, or someone else had gotten a hold of McAfee's phone. Sadly, none of these spooky reports are true. While McAfee's remains still haven't been released, his wife Janice confirmed that she was able to identify them as her husband's. And it's really fucked that McAfee's remains still haven't been released. After all those years of being constantly hounded by the authorities, you would think that it would all be over now, but they just abjectly refuse to allow the man the rest of a burial and are robbing his wife of the chance to gain some closure and say goodbye. There was a petition launched to call for the return of McAfee's remains to Janice, but sadly, those didn't go anywhere. And she is still filing appeals with the Spanish courts, though those aren't going particularly well either. Now, I'm just spitballing here, so don't take this as gospel, but I have a hunch that McAfee's remains are being withheld because Janice is pretty open about the fact that she wants a post-mortem carried out by her own people to determine for herself whether the official report is true, and if it isn't, what really happened. But I guess we won't know anytime soon. But wait, just one more thing. What about the dead man switch that McAfee talked about? Well, part of why I've made this video now was just to make sure that there weren't any loose ends on that front, and I'm very sorry to say that the fallout is rather disappointing. A scheduled Instagram post of a big Q went up, which was soon followed by the deletion of his account. But apart from that rustling some jimmies, there really wasn't any posthumous social media activity on McAfee's part. So, unfortunately, the dead man switch doesn't really seem to exist. Some thought that the Instagram post served a similar purpose, though it was widely assumed to be a signal of some kind to the QAnon guys. Of course, they all immediately went apeshit upon seeing the post, declaring that McAfee had been killed by the deep state for what he knew. Which is true, but that doesn't mean that those nutters are right about the rest of their beliefs. The deep state is not a shadowy organisation solely dedicated to covering up a child sex trafficking ring run by Democratic and Hollywood elites. They also run defence for Republicans and corporations. Since Q, let's just be very honest, it was all a lot of shite, and because of that, others saw McAfee's final post for what it most likely was. Just one final shit post from beyond the grave. Because you see, McAfee had memed on the QAnon conspiracy a number of times in the past, even offering the mysterious Q the chance to be his running mate in the 2020 election if they revealed themselves, in addition to making fun of them in a very McAfee fashion. Even though we never got any closure on exactly what McAfee knew or what happened to him or why, that doesn't mean that he went out on a bum note. I think we all knew from the start that this story only had one possible ending, and yet McAfee still managed to use his final public act as one last shitpost for the road. After a long career of fucking with people, McAfee effortlessly managed to secure his legacy and cement himself as one of the finest trolls of all time. After all, who else would convince the entire world that they fuck whales just for a meme? But the levels of irony that McAfee operated under achieved a lot more than simply just making him entertaining. The fact that you could never tell if he was being sincere or not shrouded him in a sense of mystery that only Sam Hyde has come close to replicating. which is the source of much of this story's appeal. As Foster put it, you really don't know what's real and what's fiction. Despite the fact that there were many deeply fucked up elements to McAfee's character, such as the myriad of legal problems and especially the cavorting with girls much younger than him and the sexual assault allegations, the man was so charismatic that those that he went on the run with couldn't help but be caught up with the thrill of the adventure and McAfee's daredevil eccentricity. While Foster eventually quit because he couldn't reconcile his continued association with McAfee after the rape allegations, he still couldn't deny the sheer power of McAfee's presence and the appeal of the wild quest of being in his company, saying, and I quote, "I loved it. I was like on a thrill ride. It was like a great grand adventure for me." Foster also said that McAfee can, and I quote, "be so genuine and so real, so poetic, but he could also be so dark, so paranoid, and so dangerous." Despite having spent months with McAfee, Foster really struggled to get a genuine read on the man. And the Vice journalists couldn't quite seem to manage it either, because they had to omit a lot of stuff that they couldn't fully prove, like the rape allegations. But also, how do you present the authoritative story of a man when every narrator involved is unreliable? In the end, Foster summed up this dual nature best by saying that McAfee was the most brilliant, manipulative person he's ever met. After all, he spent 4 years living like a fucking cartoon villain in the jungle and somehow managed to completely reinvent himself as a sort of anti-hero by fighting an even bigger evil than himself. I mean, did he even actually fight that bigger evil, or did he just get caught dodging taxis and decide to literally run with the narrative? While we can speculate all day, the only thing that we can know for certain is that either answer is pretty fucking based. McAfee's true character is extremely hard to pin down because the sheer zaniness of the shit that he certainly did made all of his more ridiculous claims that bit more believable, and vice versa. He committed to the bit so hard that travelling with him almost seemed like a huge exercise in gaslighting, because it's just impossible to tell which aspects of him were real and which were made up. In that regard, McAfee's ghostwriter was almost like a Nick Carraway figure trying to keep up with a modern-day Gatsby. But does that even matter anyway? After all, so much of McAfee's appeal comes from not just the crazy antics, but the sheer mystery behind them. Surely there's a point where the mask ends up becoming the face. I mean, trying to figure out McAfee's true nature is like trying to figure out what the fuck Tom Bombadil is. As McAfee put it himself, the trajectory of my existence wound past events and situations that some of you may find difficult to believe. For this, I have no recommendation other than to say that, in my experience, every life is unbelievable if fully revealed and viewed by someone else. We are all island inhabitants, and we have no neighbours. What lies beyond the boundary of our own skin, as I have experienced the world, is an endless mystery. For me, the exquisite beauty of living lies within that mystery. As begrudging as it may be because he wasn't fully a good man, it's really hard not to respect McAfee for the fact that he is one of the last great men of action who carped every DM, and took every man's fantasy of being a swashbuckling adventurer and made it happen. In essence, John McAfee was pretty much the last outlaw, but while he fought the law and the law won, he certainly gave them hell.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody just subscribe.